About to leak all the passwords.
All right, the stream is live. And hit start on the event.
Live now.
Ooh. It turns the VC green.
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
Now everyone's like, oh my god, green. Green means go.
And let me once again turn off my notification. Notification,
Oh,
that's
and
the wrong button.
also ping everyone. Be like,
Yep.
questions? Hello.
Okay, notifications are off.
Hello, runner of the roads.
Hello.
Hello. When people start joining in, I feel like I'm sitting on a parade float just waving. Like, hey, how's it going? Hey, welcome. Hey. Thanks for coming. I am not hearing? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's unfortunate.
Oh.
All right, we'll give a few more minutes for people to shuffle in.
Fine.
Types says first on
Oh.
Twitch.
Yeah. Actually, I was first. Thank you very much, but I didn't type, so I'll give it to you.
Second question mark asks Rooked. I believe you are.
Rook with hello, dude.
Azure says, I'm only joining if you close the AvGi pull request during the stream. This can be arranged.
Don't tempt me. I'll do it again. I've already done it. Give some time people to. Oh, you didn't ping the. You got to link the question thing so people can submit stuff
I mean, how many times before have I linked it?
every time.
Not last time.
Here, I'll do it. Link to the.
Yes, we only have 3 submitted questions, so a reminder that there is a submission box for these events. What even are questions? That's a good idea. That's a good question. What even are questions really?
I was about to submit the
Vsauce music.
response.
All right, I think it's been 3 minutes now, so I think that's enough time to let people shuffle in. If anyone else shows up later, then well, this is what the replays are for. So thank you everyone for arriving for our 4th monthly Dev Campfire chat. Once again, essentially just the Sog and Derpy show here because we are who are available at the time. If you have any questions for any of the other devs, honestly, you can ask us anyway, and we can pass things along if you really need us to. But this is our usual panel here. So, version 0.10.4 released the other week. How's everyone feeling about it? If you hadn't opted into the beta on Steam or grabbed 0.10.3, then this update will also include all the 0.10.3 features and changes. I'm hoping everyone's enjoying it and looking forward to what more there is to come in the future.
Just test that this link's working.
Rising says continuous players not noticing anything at all. Yeah. We have some people who play every single update, or every single commit, basically. No, Lemuria, it is not. that's a big topic. We'll not really discuss that here. SirDerpyHorse says 0.10.4 was fun. It's good to hear. It's good to hear.
Good.
I have a little birdie on another server who I guess no one really came through. I was told there might be some interesting questions
Oh,
in the submission box, and I guess no one bothered to actually post their interesting questions. But
same.
yeah, so Unfettered was on another Discord server, and a bunch of people on there were talking about Endless Sky. So it's like, and they were like apparently talking crap.
Oh.
And Unfettered was like, there's a submission box. They talk about it every month. If you want to talk crap to the devs, you can post here. Interesting question. Sounds like a threat, says the Weird Nut. Yeah. But it was, I guess some of the guys there, they had played the game before, but it had been a while. It was like, yo, there's all this new stuff. It's like, that's how we roll. We just, time after time, every update, new stuff, Lemuria asks, has there been any new content involving the Free World's storyline? There was a few updates ago, but nothing as of recent. So
There was like a couple missions that were indirect leads.
Yeah.
Free
There
World
was
story.
a short string of missions that was added prior to when the bombing occurs, where the intention of the missions was to lead the player down to the southern region of human space, so that it's more likely that if you would have gotten this string of missions, that you would also end up in the Free World's territory by the time that the bombs drop, and therefore by the time that you can actually start picking up the missions from the Free Worlds. Tempestro asks, any plans to somehow explain how the Remnant, ever paranoid, let you fly their ships through human space? Or why the Navy doesn't stop you from doing the same with the high ships, if I recall correctly. So, part of that is the fact that for the longest time, we actually couldn't even check what ship you had. So, this is mainly for the high. We used to be able to see which category of ships the player has in missions, but we couldn't say, okay, what category is the flagship? Or what type of ship is the flagship? We can now do that. Although that is relatively recent in the grand scheme of the game, that we're now able to have missions check which ship model the player has. Which means that for the longest time, that wasn't done just because it wasn't able to be done. At this point, though, I would say that part of the game's identity, I've said, is in something of a sandbox game. You have all these different ship hulls and all these different outfits that you can put in ships regardless of what model the ship is. It really encourages customization and mixing and maxing, or matching. Yeah. But if we were to somehow add some story of, well, if you're in this specific ship, then this faction's not going to like you for going in these areas of the game. Or if you have a high ship and you come back to Republic space, the Navy is going to be like, yo, you can't be doing that, fly something else. It really disencourages customization, and not in an interesting way. So maybe you could point to like, well, why can you be fined for having nerve gas? Or like, why are there illegal outfits? Doesn't that discourage the use of nerve gas? I mean, in a sense it does. But the reasons that nerve gas has gameplay mechanics that discourage usage is because it's a powerful tool in your arsenal for hand-to-hand combat. And there are actually ways to get around the fact that you'll be fined if you're scanned with nerve gas. So we already have interference plating in the game, which makes it so that if a ship is scanning you, it is more likely to fail its scan, given the increased amount of interference plating you have. Now, we do actually have a bunch of other mechanics that tie into scanning. For example, A while ago, like some updates ago, we added a mechanic where if you have normal commodities in your cargo hold, I believe this is a thing now. If you have normal commodities in your cargo hold, that in effect actually acts as interference plating. So if you're hiding illegal cargo, but you have a bunch of normal cargo like built up around it, you are less likely for that cargo to be spotted when you get scanned. So if you didn't know that, part of the reason this isn't probably explained in game at all is because we just haven't really built up the scanning gameplay a lot. Scanning gameplay is most likely something that's going to be more important once we start expanding pirate gameplay, because you're going to be ferrying around illegal goods a lot more often if you're a pirate. But that's why that's not explained. So if you didn't know that, you can now know that. If you're taking pirate jobs with illegal cargo, try and not fill up your cargo hold with just illegal cargo. Try and throw in some normal commodities in there. I forget the exact ratio, but there is a ratio to it where it's like, I think it's every 2 normal commodities to every 1 illegal cargo makes it so you're half as likely for that illegal cargo to be spotted, or something to that effect. Don't quote me on that exactly, but there is a ratio to it to where it starts really taking effect. But if you have more illegal cargo than you have normal cargo, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have normal cargo. It's not going to shield your illegal cargo at all because most of what you have is illegal. Some other features that we have are, but that aren't ready yet, or not that they're not ready. They're implemented. They're mechanics in the game, but we have no outfits that use them. An example of this would be we have a attribute which allows you to completely conceal illegal goods in your cargo hold. So I just explained how you can have normal cargo that kind of hides the fact that you have illegal cargo. That only reduces your chance that the illegal cargo will be found. But we have a mechanic where if you have an outfit with this attribute, it will make it so that a certain number of tons of illegal cargo is completely impossible for anyone to scan. That is an outfit attribute that we will eventually add to the game on an actual pirate outfit. Like I said, once things get rolling with a lot more pirate gameplay expansion. But that's why Nerve Gas has that illegal mechanic to it, is because it's a play and a counterplay thing. But if we were to say, oh, the Navy doesn't like it that you're flying high ships, well, what's the counterplay there? They see that you're flying a high ship. There's no real way for you to obscure that, unless somehow we make it so that you can make your ship look like a different ship. But then that just kind of seems like a headache type of thing. How would that work? But yeah. Hector says we have optical jammers. I mean, that's for optical tracking rockets, though. For missiles, it's a bit different than saying, "Oh, you cannot see this ship because its optical jamming is too high."
Yeah, a less exciting and very simple answer to that question, though, real quick. Technically, the alien ships you're flying around in, the humans aren't going to know those are remnant ships. They're going to see them as alien ships, but they're not. The remnant might think that there hasn't been any humans besides you who have seen them, so they're not going to be concerned, because the humans are just going to think it's some other alien technology that the player's meddling with, because they're always getting involved in these bigger, ambitious stories. So same thing with the high. I think actually in High Reveal, when it's brought up, they mentioned that there's like a little scene on TV or something like that where they say it's like props for a new movie or something. So it's both kind of do the humans or insert race here know that those are ships from someone else, and also do people who do know where those are from, do they want that out, or are they just going to play it off? So
Hector says my headcanon is that random humans just assume that anything weird looking is Quarg. Yeah, that's a possibility, because
it can also work.
someone says there's a bot on Twitch. Let me check.
Is there a new chat? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's get rid of that one.
We're good.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, there is also a fact of I was actually just talking with Sog something about this before we started here. As the player, you can cross human space in a matter of minutes. Mm-hmm. But in universe, it takes several days for things to move around. It is a very large galaxy in a sense. It takes time to travel. So, in that sense, and also in the sense that not everyone in humanity is able to just pick up and leave. There are some people, there probably even like most people in universe in humanity have never left their world. If they have, they've like gone up, went to one other planet for a bit, and then came back home. But usually, people are going to stay on their own planet. It's like you're not leaving. Maybe some of you are, but most people aren't leaving their where they live very far, very often. Now, something that would be really interesting is if somebody lived on one planet and then worked on another. That could be kind of funny, but that's probably not common because it takes money to travel between planets.
Mm.
In that sense, there's a likelihood that like if some random human sees that you're flying a high ship, maybe they assume like, oh, that's very alien, that must be Quarg. Or maybe they're just like, oh, that must be like some sort of prototype ship that's being flown around. Now,
Yeah, not,
maybe
yeah.
for the sake of gameplay, we only have so many ships in the game, but it's possible that in universe there are like prototype ships that like shipyards will fly around to as like a media hype type of thing, or just to try them out and see how they work. And people might see those and be like, "Yo, I've never seen that before." And then it turns out, oh, it's just a prototype ship of some sort.
Mm.
So that possibility could also be there, where people there's nothing that really said like when you look at a high ship, there's nothing that really says, "Oh, that's alien." It just in some sense, it's just like, "Oh, it's a different ship. I've never seen that before. I wonder where it's from." It could be alien, but that's generally not going to be people's first thought, I imagine. Like if
Well,
you saw a brand new car that was like wicked cool, never been seen before, doesn't look like anything else, your first thought's not going to be, "Oh, aliens." Maybe, but go ahead, Sog.
I was gonna say, Hector says we know that happens from the Kestrel. Well, the Kestrel's kind of a special case. It's an Easter egg. It's not really canon within the game itself. So, but I guess you could say it applies to that.
I
It'd be
mean,
kind of the more human
yeah.
ship of this whole deal.
I think the
That's
story of the Kestrel we can consider like, oh, that's canon. The
yeah,
design of the Kestrel is what's the Easter egg.
yeah.
And like part of the story that the guy gives you about the image of this Kestrel coming to his mind, that's also like Easter eggy territory. But I mean, it happens. So the Weird Nut asks, is there a secret ritual for getting pull requests merged, or is it just a matter of waiting for dev time? And I saw that Roadrunner had responded, devs have limited free time. The more likely reason a pull request isn't receiving attention from them is just because they haven't gotten to it yet. Try not to take it personally. Yeah, there's,
Mm.
as you can see if you check on GitHub, there's 151 open pull requests right now.
Again,
Yeah. Sometimes we have enough time where we can depress how many open pull requests there are, and we'll get a bunch done in a short amount of time. But even when we're doing that, there's still a lot of stuff we can't get to. So it is just an
mm.
unfortunate matter of there's a lot more people making pull requests than there are reviewing and merging pull requests. And the time that it takes to review some of these pull requests is or can be significant. So, yeah, unfortunately, it is just a matter of you got to wait. Um, we do, in some respects, look toward like what are people interested in seeing merged, and generally, if there's a high interest in something, we'll try and take a look at that. And
Uh,
don't do this all the time, but you can also just ask us, like, "Hey, can you look at this?"
mhm.
Because, uh, no joke, there was Hurl, I think it was, requested my review on a pull request, and I was like, "Oh wait, I forgot this thing existed." Like I had looked at it before and I had commented on it before, but I had just moved to other stuff because my comments were kind of to the effect of like, "Oh, this isn't in a ready state. Can you work on this?" And then in the time between uh, like when I said that and when Hurl got to it, and then when he requested my review for it again, I had worked on so much other stuff that I genuinely forgot about it. So there is just that much stuff that sometimes we don't realize, like, oh, hey, this is actually a cool thing that we could add that is generally ready, but we just haven't seen it yet.
It's not uncommon for the opposite to happen either, because for me, in my case, there was a couple of artwork PRs that I reviewed like a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, and I pinged the people who made the PRs. It's like, hey, can you get to my comments on this? They said, I forgot. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, we do that too. Like some people only have so many pull requests, yet they still are like,
yeah,
oh wait, I forgot I had this. So we have to ping
yeah.
people
So
sometimes, like,
it's
hey,
just a
can you get back to this?
matter of everyday life sort of thing. Nothing really personal or anything like that.
Yeah, 151. Somebody's like 51
Yeah,
open pull requests.
I
No,
wish.
didn't we have 190 a few months ago? We never actually reached 190. So this is something cool that Hector did. He found that on the GitHub command line interface, you can query the GitHub API for information about pull request and issues and commits on a repository. So he queried all of the pull requests, when they were opened, when they were closed, when they were merged, who they were opened by, a bunch of other information. And then he posted a CSV file in one of our channels, and we just spent like several hours just going through this data. And I made a graph of when, or on which days, how many pull requests were opened. And our peak was 185. We have never gone above 185. That happened, I think it was April 2021. Let me see if I can find exactly when it was. Or maybe somebody can post the graph if they have it. Let me see. Okay, our peak was June 20th, or actually June 19th to June 21st of 2021. We had 185 open pull requests all 3 of those days. Now, I'm only counting day by day, so maybe at some point during those days it bumped up to 186. But if you look at like midnight of every day, that's how many pull requests we had opened max. The lowest we've been since then is 119. That occurred on April 20th and 21st of this year. So I've kind of said like my goal at this point is, okay, let's see if we can get below 119 by the end of the year. I got a lot of PTO in the works here, so maybe that's possible. If you have open pull requests, get ready for a lot of reviews to occur in December.
Yep. All right, I linked to the forum again real quick for anyone who still wants to get a question in that isn't in this chat.
Yeah, currently we're answering questions from chat, but
yeah, we usually do it through the forum too. But.
Yeah. Usually we get to the forum first, but I just saw a question I wanted to answer, so I was like, let's just get into it. Speaking of people posting in chat, let me check Twitch chat. Musa says, would it be cool if there was a proof of loyalty quest where you can go kill something to prove you are still human or that you still like humans? I don't know. That seems a bit odd. What would you be killing?
Yeah. Do you know how to destroy rocks still?
Yeah. Juggalo Zizek says, great game you guys have here. Looking forward to playing through it again after the latest update.
Thank you.
Glad we could give you some enjoyment.
I seem to have a lot of longtime fans I see on Steam and whatnot. They're always like, super excited that the game's still alive and not dead. It is far from dead, actually. Yeah. So.
Kim says, Oi, this discussion. I remember this from GitHub and then really laughed when I encountered it in-game. That was posted 6 minutes ago. I admittedly forget what you're referring to. Musa says, you don't know how I think the Cybertruck is an alien conspiracy. Perhaps. It's a Martian conspiracy. Kim says, And the Sky is my absolutely favorite game, by the way. That is good to hear. It is on the top of my list, too.
Did you stars? Stars
The Weird then asks, what is the correct balance between pinging devs to check pull requests and just waiting patiently? I would say if your pull request has just been opened, then we'll have seen it. Like, I still check what's being opened and what's being talked about.
I check daily.
Yeah. But if it's, let's say after a month, we haven't even, there's like no comment or anything from us on GitHub, then maybe it's worth like saying like, hey, have you looked at this? And then you can kind of talk to us and we'll tell you our initial thoughts on it, because like Saga and I just said, we at least see what's being opened. And generally when something is opened, I'll take a quick look at it and I'll think like, oh, this looks like it needs a bit of work here and there, but I'll probably respond to it later.
I'd say sorry, good.
Like, I was just gonna say, because like usually when I write out something for a pull request, like in terms of review, I want to really take the time to sit down, go through it, and find detail and figure, okay, what exactly was changed here. I generally try to avoid making like snap comments of like, oh, this is terrible. Get rid of it. Unless I'm like scrolling through and I see like a bug. Sometimes like with a code pull request, I'll see someone does something. It's like, oh, that's just not going to work, and here's why. And I'll explain to them. Because like for example, who was it? Was it Delvin recently? Not to really call you out or anything. I don't think he's here right now. But the timer mechanic pull request. I noticed that in the load function, he was calling find on the planets in the game and seeing, oh, is this planet null, as in has it not been defined? If that's the case, then do something else. Here's the thing, though. You can't guarantee the load order. I mean, you kind of can in terms of where you place things, but in game, like or when the game is loading, the game itself cannot guarantee the load order of stuff in the game. So when the game is loading, if you try to check, has this thing been defined yet? You might get a no, even though it's going to be defined later. So that's one of the things that you want to avoid. Don't use find or get on like a list of defined objects when the game is loading, and then see if it's null pointer or not. Because it's very likely it is going to be null pointer, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It just hasn't loaded yet. So that's something. Like I didn't review that pull request in full. I just noticed that and was like, oh hey, this is a mistake.
I was just gonna say that usually our kind of philosophy on it is if a PR isn't gotten to by the owner or a reviewer in a month, we usually ping it or make note of it. So if we don't see a PR within a month, then yeah, definitely ping us.
Yeah.
But if it's opened, at the very least, me and Derpy get notifications for it. So.
All right, maybe
we can start doing questions.
Yeah, let's
from the submission box. Some good ones.
Yeah, let's hop over to the. Okay, now we're getting questions coming into the submission box. So first question: can you share any history about the person ships? So, as far as person ships go, I guess Sog, you've played Escape Velocity. Maybe you can say a bit more about this. I do know that one of our person ships is Captain Pester. And in Escape Velocity, do you know the name of the character who messed with you if you didn't pay for the game? I think EVN had it.
Actually, not just EVN, but in EVN it was Captain Hector. But I think MZ based it on the character from Escape Velocity Override, which was, I believe, is it still Hector? I need to search this up now.
Wasn't it named after a parrot?
It was named after a parrot, yes.
Yeah.
Someone's probably gonna hit me with it in chat before I actually find it. Yeah. Oh no, it was Hector. Okay, so it was Hector. Or is that just for Okay, no, it's Hector in all the games. So it's Captain Hector, and in Escape Velocity Override, I don't know what it was, or if it was an Escape Velocity, but in the second game in Override, she's a parrot in real life. What would happen is if you didn't register the game, which costed I think $10 at the time. So it was kind of like a demo period. If you didn't register it, whenever you landed, and I was a little kid, right? So this scared the shit out of me every time. It would play a really loud parrot sound and pop up a little dialogue saying, register the game now. You can't do anything else. And it would steal 80% of your credits. Flat 80% every time it happened. So this was a jump scare to me as a kid. But yeah, it was... So this isn't a person ship. This was before that happened, but there were person ships in that game. But the actual person ship of it was in Escape Velocity Nova, where she was flying a star bridge, so this small medium warship kind of thing. But it had a heavy warship weapons on it, and if you didn't register the game, it would hunt you down every second of the game.
Yeah, it would hunt you down and kill you. I will say none of the person ships in the game hunt you down and kill you, but no. Captain Pester is a reference to the Hector person ship in Escape Velocity Nova. And then we have MZ's person ship, the creator of the game. That's kind of self-explanatory. It's his own ship. And then
Just real quick, person ships in general are ships in the game that represent the developers of the game or people special to the development of the game.
Hmm.
And it is kind of it follows after Escape Velocity that they also do that. So they'll have their main leads or teams with their own person ships that have pretty rare spawn rates, and they just kind of show up every now and then, say some quirky things, and
Yeah.
be on their way or kill pirates. The Kestrel is a pretty special case because the Kestrel was in the very first Escape Velocity game, which was I think before the '90s, or maybe it was the '90s. So MZ wanted to have that ship, and
Yeah, the legendary M has pointed out Captain Pester won't attack you, but you'll be fined if you have any illegal goods.
yes, yes, they still pester you somewhat.
Yeah, Juggalo says good old shareware defenses. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, person ships are just representative of the
Hmm.
development team and members who work on the game.
Yeah, so the mechanic
Some,
itself is kind of it comes from Escape Velocity, but the history and then there was MZ and Pester were the first two person ships, and just over the years we've
mhm,
added more for different people or situations or groups of people. So I don't know if we want to. If I imagine the question isn't like, oh, what's the history of every single individual person ship,
yeah.
but that's the history of person ships. So
Yeah. There's a couple person ships that are kind of different. There's like the Subsidiary is actually a person ship. That one gets brought up a lot.
hmm
It's actually used in some of the games lore right now. I'm not sure where that's going at the moment, but it just they're these kind of like passive. They show up every between I think 10 to 30 minutes. It's a random selection from certain values.
yeah.
So person ships.
Mr.
Um,
Guineo asks, would it be possible to generate art for portraits for the many characters in the game, like our mates in the Freeworlds Council or maybe some aliens like Rek? Barney
uh,
at Rust has an image of his own, and since this is an RPG in space, I think having images to relate to would help us connect with the many characters. God knows I've sometimes forgotten who is who when I see just their name during the missions.
you want me to answer this one?
Go ahead.
All right. So this is a question that gets brought up almost pretty much every dev chat of whether or not we have portraits in the game. We ended up deciding not to have portraits because we feel it's a little bit more expressive for the player to kind of imagine what the player or the species and other members look like in the game. There is the one photo of who is it? What's his name? The
Edward.
Freeworlds campaign. Yeah, Edward. That one's just kind of. I want to say it's kind of like a relic of the early parts of the game,
Hmm.
but there's no like overall push to have portraits, and we kind of want to avoid it because we also don't want to have like strict representations of the species in the game. So, like for example, this one gets brought up a lot. When people say hi, they think there's giant squirrels. They say they look like giant squirrels. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are just that. They might have different like proportions or whatnot, something that wouldn't just appear as a giant squirrel. But we so that's just kind of something we really don't really see us doing, and especially generation art. This is also kind of a hot topic. We don't really want to be doing any generative or AI art for Endless Sky because we do already have a lot of talented people who like making stuff for the game, and we prefer that. Not only we prefer, but they prefer that they make their own special inclusions to the game rather
Human
than
hand made this game.
yes. So that's kind of where we are at with portraits and representation. So Barmy especially, yeah.
Yeah. It's
It's
the
kind of
journey,
more
not
of
the
a up to
destination, says
your
Hector. Yeah.
yeah, up to your imagination sort of thing.
Yeah. I will say, I get the idea that some people would prefer to have portraits, but
Hmm.
there's also some people who don't.
Yeah.
And we've generally decided against having portraits in the game. Now, if you actually go back to version 0.9.9, I think it is.
Aren't they still in the files?
Yes, we do actually have. If you go into the game's files, go to the images folder, and then there is a portraits file. We did actually used to have portraits. Whenever you go to the spaceport, you'll get that spaceport news pop up. That pop up used to include an image of whoever was talking to you. MZ had added this to the game as a bit of a experimental thing just to see how it worked out. He grabbed a bunch of like free portrait images off of some website, threw them in the game,
Yeah.
and then it would just choose a random image to show for every single spaceport news pop up.
Mhm.
And
Like,
this was met with mixed feedback.
yeah,
We ended up deciding to remove it, and part of our rationale was actually the fact that we can't really have good alien portraits.
yeah,
So if you skim through that folder, you'll actually see that we had portraits for the Korth, the Korg, the Wanderers, the High. It's literally just pictures of animals. The High is literally just a squirrel looking at the camera. The Korg looks like a turtle. The Korth is a lizard of some sort. The Wanderers is just an owl.
yeah.
So,
I was actually saying this earlier, but it would be pretty difficult to kind of have alien portraits because one, if we're having human portraits, what style are they going to be in? Is it going to be drawn? Is it going to be
hmm
abstract? Is it going to be realistic, photorealistic? And if we do it that way, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of mimic that style to have
hmm
plausible alien portraits as well. And kind of vice versa, where if the alien portraits are modeled or if they're sculpted or something, that'll look kind of odd against the humanoid portraits, and so on and so forth. And I guess that does kind of lead into the whole, well, then why not have it generated, which kind of goes back to we're not really interested in using AI for the game. So,
hmm and jumping off of something Saul just mentioned, where it's if we do humans one way, it can make it difficult or harder to do aliens another way or the same way.
mm,
That phrase there, it makes it harder, is very important. We want to keep the barrier to entry for developing new content for the game
hmm,
relatively low. Like not super low, so it's like the bar is below the ground, but there is a level, there is a range that we don't want to raise the barrier to entry higher than. And I think
yep,
that if we were to introduce portraits for all factions in the game, that would be significantly raising the barrier to entry. Because currently, you all you have to do is have like a rough explanation or a rough description of whatever alien faction you want to add. You don't need to come up with art for your faction. And then if we had art for everyone else, then the expectation would be, oh, new faction, new art. And
yep,
in order to not make it be super repetitive, you would need a lot of it. Because if you looking at that portraits folder, there are 128 images for humans. And honestly, that was repetitive. Like just 128, you would see the same images a lot. Now, I get that we can't have an infinite number so that you never recognize the same image twice, but
mm,
you would still get the same image fairly often. And I mean, humans are really good at recognizing faces, generally speaking. So it's
yeah,
difficult to make the world feel big enough by having enough portrait images because you need so many
so
images, and like I said, the barrier to entry, it would make it so that
yeah,
any time you try to make a new faction, you also have to come up with all these portraits, which can be very difficult.
yep. I was actually having a discussion earlier about this in the artwork channel, but barrier of entry between creating like ships and outfits in the sky is actually noticeably different than creating life, because when it comes to modeling ships and outfits, those are kind of more infrastructural if you kind of set aside the biological stuff, which is also still kind of modeled in the same style as the industry stuff, just with like more curves and whatnot. When it comes to life forms themselves, it is a much higher learning curve. um, Making ships in the game. I'm not saying art is easy. It never is for especially new people. Um, a lot of the ships and stuff in the sky are made with only so many shapes and kind of figurations. But when it comes to life, it's very, very picky with proportions and anatomy and um, things like that. So, if to go as far as to kind of strictly define what things look like is going to be a huge jump for people who are new to making content. And yeah,
It's
sorry,
good. It's good. I'm just
I'm
joking around with
finished.
you, dude. Um, yeah. So Guineo asks, then perhaps once the game is content complete with all the alien species done, then we could start making some art for them. I think that's a bit more likely than saying, okay, let's add it now.
Hmm.
Um, but even then, you have to realize that's a long ways away.
And after
Because
that, sorry, go ahead.
just because like we have we still have a decent amount of space left in the galaxy to add more stuff.
Yeah.
and it's not every day that we get a new alien faction.
And once
Then,
we do, if we have a whole galaxy of alien factions and stuff, that's a lot of people, depending on who made the art,
mhm,
that's a lot of different alien factions that would need art, and that would be a lot of creators that would need to kind of somehow have a consistent art style with one another in their, depending on who's making them in the art, which can be pretty hard to communicate between people in a community project. So
yeah, and then he
yeah.
pinged me, and I'm like, I'm waiting for Sog to finish. And he says, sorry, it's fine. I'm just messing with you.
No, no, you're fine. I know you're
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. Um, all right. And then, yeah, the word then asks, what does game content complete mean? The sun will expand to a red giant. We will still be adding content to the game. Yeah, there's that too. There's I do have a sense in which I want to be able to say, okay, the game in my
Mhm.
mind is finished, and then maybe I step away. I don't know. This is years away in the future, but
I do
yeah,
generally like to think that even though everyone loves our endless sky, there should be some sort of line drawn for what we consider vanilla and what plugins should be used for.
hmm
Because I know, from what I've seen, MZ really wanted plugins to be the kind of DLC, kind of expand the game beyond what it is in vanilla,
hmm
rather than just endlessly add to vanilla itself. So I feel like we'll have some sort of line someday where once the galaxy is filled and we have stories for what makes sense, that we move on from there. So
yeah, and
list plugins, yeah.
yeah, and I guess even like talking about the plugins idea, even if we say, okay, the base game is complete, now we're going to really polish things up. We're going to add alien portraits, so on and so forth. Bearing in mind that that would still even it'd be more difficult than it is now probably because
Yeah,
we'd have even more stuff to add to.
more
Um,
people to work with.
that would also increase the divide between vanilla and plugins. Because the whole thing of it would be difficult for someone who's making a new faction to create portraits for their faction. That still holds, even
Mhm.
if it's not a vanilla
Yep.
faction. So in all likelihood, we're probably never going to have in-game
Fortress, yeah.
portraits of the alien factions or of humans just to keep things consistent.
But again, that's not to say you can't make a plugin for it, which a lot of people would actually really enjoy. So these sorts of topics and concepts are perfect for plugins, and it's not something to shy away from just because it's a plugin. Because
hmm
we do have a really big plugin audience that really enjoy having these additions to the game. So
Mr.
yep.
G, he changed his nickname, says, sad to hear, but yeah, I understand. Yeah, there's
Mhm.
there's a lot of decisions we have to make like that where it's like, yeah, it would
Mhm.
be really cool to have this, but it has these downsides to it, therefore we can't really add it, given the scope of what Endless Sky is trying to be.
Miss on Twitch stream chat says, "Here at ES, we blast AI with lasers. We don't use their art."
Yeah.
Yes, down with them already when they're bad.
All right. Let's move on to
Next question.
next question. That was the it was the first question, and a tangent after that. Okay. In
Yeah.
terms of any potential future tweaks to the relative mobility of small and large ships, as you request in issue 5271, such as pull request 9451, 6481, and 34 on the Delta repository, can you describe what sort of end state you were looking for and what your end goals are? That's another. Hold on, these don't word wrap for some reason.
Yeah, I
Um,
gotta.
what your end goals are in terms of the balance of the game.
I'm assuming this is two mobility balance, or is this overall? I'm gonna assume it's for the
I mean,
mobility.
it's mainly talking about mobility, so I imagine in
Yeah.
terms of like, what are your goals in terms of mobility balance for the game? Um, my main thing is that it should not be the case that bigger equals better
Mhm.
in all things. Because right now, if you can purchase a bigger ship, there is almost no reason to not do so. Because larger ships have more health, they deal more damage per ship, not necessarily per credit. That's a discussion that's been had, and they aren't noticeably slower enough for it to become an issue. So they are larger ships are already generally slower than smaller ships, but it's not enough. It's not something that feels like a downside to you. So what this does is we end up creating this progression where, oh, I have a small ship, let me get to a larger ship, and then a larger ship, and then a larger ship. I got it better and better and better. And there should be some sense in which you are climbing a ladder. But once you get to a certain point, I feel like in order to keep things fresh, it shouldn't just be, oh, I have the biggest ship and now I'm going to buy more of the biggest ship. It should be, okay, I want to find the best ship for the scenario that I'm about to engage in. Maybe having a heavy warship will, I mean, probably still be one of the best things to do for combat. But what if you're fighting something that's stronger than you? Well, if you're in a heavy warship and you're slow and you're just taking hit after hit after hit, eventually you're done for. But maybe with enough skill in a smaller ship, you could actually take out a larger ship. So there would be a sense in which maybe you choose a smaller ship for its benefits instead of the larger ship. Now, this is a very fine line to kind of walk here. It's going to be difficult to, I feel, like get into a situation where it would make sense to choose a smaller ship. Mobility is just the main big thing. If, like in other games, if you look to the largest stuff, what happens to it? It's slower. In Endless Sky, yeah, it's slower, but it's not slower enough. I was actually talking to a friend recently. Have you played EVE Online? So in EVE, now I'm not like a super big EVE head or anything. I played it a little bit. But to my understanding, EVE has... So we're probably not going to be able to do this because EVE is 3D, we're 2D. And EVE's combat is kind of like a simulated thing. When you fire on an enemy ship, it's not necessarily a guarantee that you'll hit it. There's like it basically rolls dice to figure out will you hit the ship. But that dice rolling has a lot of mechanics behind it. Whether you hit the ship depends on how good your turrets, your weapons targeting is. And does your ship have any targeting improvements? And does the target you're aiming against have any like anti-targeting buffs to it? Like does it make it harder to target? Does it have any jamming or anything? There's a lot of balance around making it so that bigger ships aren't necessarily the best. The Legendary M says the thing is, EVE's largest ship is so much bigger than the smallest ship, than ES's largest ship to the ES's smallest ship. Yeah, there's much more scale in EVE, which we can't reach because we're limited by the 2D nature of the game in some sense. Or not necessarily limited by the 2D, the fact that it's 2D. It's more so like, yeah, it's a design choice in terms of the scale of things. We're not scaling up EVE like EVE, where like the biggest ship is like thousands of times bigger than the smallest ship, because there's the zoom levels in EVE are also a lot greater than what we have. But if you're in a big ship in EVE and you try to attack a smaller ship, you're missing most of the time. At least from what I remember, it was very difficult to hit a small ship and a very large ship, and it's probably impossible for a Titan to hit a what's the smallest ship in that game? Frigate? Or at least the smallest ship class. I'm forgetting.
Corvette, something like that.
I think Corvette was above that. Was it Frigate, Corvette, Destroyer, Battlecruiser, Battleship?
Titan,
Or no, Cruiser, Battlecruiser, Battleship.
Supercarrier.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Smart bombs go burr. Yeah. But but yeah. So the idea though is there's at least some sense of balance in EVE where smaller ships don't get instantly ganked by larger ships. Endless Sky doesn't have that. And part of it is that you really can't escape quick enough in a small ship compared to a large ship, because the large ship can at least somewhat keep pace with you. So in terms of, I don't know if this is necessarily answering the question. It's more of like a broad idea of how we want to, or like what we're kind of aiming for is a situation in which sometimes there's a case in which it makes sense to choose a smaller ship. Another point to it is it's a death sentence to choose a Sparrow at the start of the game and try and actually engage in combat. Because everything is more powerful than you. And I feel like there's not enough, like certainly for some people, you could probably be in a Sparrow and take out something that's like slightly larger than you, like a better interceptor. But for most people, I imagine you're not taking out anything in a Sparrow. And I think part of that is the Sparrow does not have enough maneuverability. I was messing around in a Sparrow a few months ago trying to take out a Fury, and the problem is I could never get behind it. It was always aimed directly at me, and there was no chance I could damage it without it damaging me. I even threw on some missiles, but missiles have been balanced in such a way right now that it's very hard to hit small ships with missiles. So it was like, I can't do anything here. I think maybe I was using meteor missiles, which are probably not the best. I probably could have swapped to Sidewinders, but there were just none nearby. So I was like, hey, I'll just grab meteors. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I give up. I can't take this thing down. Because it was just not in the best state. And I feel like if the Sparrow was faster, or not necessarily faster, something that Zitch has talked about a lot is acceleration. If the Sparrow accelerated more, maybe I could try and juke the Fury a bit better and actually put some damage onto it without taking damage myself or as much damage myself. And another thing is, with the way that generators work, if you're backing away from your opponent to heal, you're also giving your opponent time to heal. By the time you go back in for an attack, unless your generation is better than their generation, you're just back to square one. You're not making any progress. So that's another thing that has been talked about, is how the way that shield generators work right now really disincentivizes hit and run tactics. It really incentivizes this whole death ball, face to face, just bum rush your enemy, and hope that you out DPS them. So that's another thing. Like, not even just big ships versus small ships, but the whole death ball, try and face slam your enemy. Speed doesn't matter speed can't matter if hit and run tactics can't work.
Yeah, I will say, just kind of in the back of my head, it's reminding me, like, one thing in the Escape Velocity series is that small ships had really high shield regen, meanwhile larger ships had a lot, like, comparatively slower. So yeah, that's another thing to kind of think about.
Yeah.
As for, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, as for the question in general, it's just to kind of give a generic answer back. It's kind of make larger ships less worth the run, make smaller ships a little bit better against them, kind of make things a little bit, for the larger side, more sluggish a little bit, and then modify some other aspects indirectly to see how that works, like the shields and whatnot. So I did, because in this question is listed a couple of issues in PRs. I was looking at 9451, which is Doom Korath's rebalanced ship mass. So this would affect acceleration. And it does have like a noticeable like shift in difference in the smallest ships and the largest ships. So that's we're trying to kind of figure out like a little bit more of a gap between those in terms of balance. So
yeah, so Ivan says, what about giving most generators a delay in their regeneration, making the generation delay the rule instead of a Kahet exclusive? And Iraqi responds, that just craps on heavy warships to never regen ever, as they're large enough and slow enough that it's unlikely, or extremely unlikely, that they will ever get enough of a break to regenerate. So there is, I have thought of using delay, or regeneration delays a lot more, but as Iraqi says, there's a bit of a balancing act to it, because then the heavy warships will never be able to regenerate. I think that the play there is we need different types of generation. We need certain generators that are high regen, but they have delays to them, and other generators that are low regen but no delay. So it would make more sense on a larger warship that's going to be taking more hits to use these no delay or low delay shield regenerators, so they at least have enough, like a slight amount of regen to kind of fend off against light attacks. But then the smaller ships would have the high regen, where they can get away. If they're away for long enough, they will regenerate a lot more health than whatever they're trying to attack. Hector says, personally, I'd like to see small generators have high regen, high delay, where small regenerators have low regen and low or no delay. Yeah, that's what I'm That's what I'm talking about
What
here.
the
Um,
small toilet?
yeah, yeah. Benny says Derpy agrees with one of my ideas. Yeah, but this is something that I'm definitely thinking about doing. I don't know if we'll make it so that like the existing human generators are all the same line. Maybe we add a separate line of human generators, or maybe we just split the human generators in half. So like this half is the high regen, low delay. The other half, or high regen, higher delay. The other one is low regen, low delay. Probably makes sense to add new generators, but we'll see how that works out. But
Perhaps.
something to note though with like bringing this idea up, there is a lot of moving parts when it comes to having a balanced combat system in a game. When we talk about like, oh, we need more mobility in smaller ships and less mobility in larger ships, that's not the only thing we're thinking about. We're also thinking about shield regeneration. We're also looking at like secondary weapons, because I know in some sense human secondary weapons aren't in the best spot at the moment. Something I've also thought about, and that I know a lot of other people have talked about, is Frizzer just said it: weapon range and turret turning.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
turret thing
if
especially.
we increase small ship acceleration, we also need to increase weapon ranges, mainly for blasters. I'm thinking because blasters have a relatively low velocity. It makes them easy to dodge.
Mhm.
If your target is kind of stationary in a way, but excuse me, or if whatever's firing at you is not moving like toward you or anything, but if you've ever been in a very fast ship using blasters or like any projectile weapon, really, you'll notice that you have a bit of a Doppler effect with your projectiles. If you are flying at a very high speed and firing in front of you, you'll see your projectiles will squish, and if you're flying away, or if you're flying away from your direction of travel, your projectiles will spread out a lot more. That's just the Doppler effect in effect, because your projectiles from your weapons, unless they're missiles, they will actually only move at the velocity that is set on the weapon. They will not gain velocity from the ship that's firing them. So when you shoot in front of you, if you're going fast enough, then you're going faster relative to your projectiles, so they slow down relative to each other. And that actually makes it so that it almost feels like in high speed, high acceleration ships that your range is lower. It makes it a bit, at least for when I was messing with it, it felt a bit odd using blasters on a very high speed interceptor.
They kind of trail behind you sometimes, even.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's some sense in which we want to look at increasing velocities and ranges
Hmm.
on blasters and maybe some other smaller ships.
All right.
Yeah, lots of moving parts. So don't
Lots
think
of
we're just
things.
looking at one thing.
Balance is not necessarily about balancing one aspect of the game, as it's usually a lot of indirect and direct together. So,
Mm-hmm. All right, Sog, do you wanna
yeah. Next one.
do the next one?
Oh, what can we expect for 10.5 content?
Yeah, content.
So, I think one of a few of the bigger things, one of the more main things is I think your mining changes. Um,
I
did
mean,
you
I
want to
wouldn't
get that?
say there are changes to mining. It's more
Or
like
additions,
yeah,
kind of.
additions,
Yeah.
enhancements.
So we kind of want to add a little bit more mechanics to mining. So
Mm-hmm.
there's already a planned human ship for this and a drone actually. So first human ship with a drone bay actually. We'd like to make mining a little bit more rewarding, a little bit more intricate than it is right now. So Derpy has a couple PRs open that add a couple more mechanics. Where one of them is having a percent yield for asteroids. So it's not just
Mm-hmm.
one and done. You shoot it, it's gone. Uh,
No, it would be. It's
well, I'm
just
I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry.
yeah. So
You could
the
explain that
percent
for me.
yield is right now. When you define an asteroid and its payload, you give it some maximum number. Like
Yeah.
this is how many objects could possibly drop from this asteroid when it's destroyed. But then the actual amount is roughly 7 or roughly 25% of what you put in, and you can't tweak that. So you can't say, I want an asteroid that will drop one item and only ever one item every single time you mine it. Now you could. Well,
Yeah.
or you will be able to.
Yep. Another thing is a little flotsam tractor beam to pick up the minables. So that'll be another little fun kind of like utility turret. It'd be like kind of the first one aside from the anti-missile turret, actually, where it'd be this. Is it automatic?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of a little neat thing to add, and it kind of opens up some opportunities for other parts of the game. So I believe some parts of the pirate campaign actually use a mining type ship. It definitely helped me out over on the Gaidno side of things. So that's one thing that we'd like to expect for 10.5. Another thing is a little bit more expansion to the pirate side of things. Did you want to talk a little bit about that, Derpy, or do you want to kind of let them see what there is in store for that?
I mean, I kind of talked about some of the features that already exist but are not used yet that we would potentially start looking at. Although,
Interface plating, yeah.
and maybe that's a bit further off. The point is that it's not very easy to play as a pirate right now. And a large part of that is that there's very few safe places to be a pirate. Or there's also the fact that it's very difficult to travel as a pirate. If you're hostile to the Navy and to merchants, most things are hostile to you in human space. So it's very difficult to move about. There are plans to maybe make it a bit less difficult. Maybe give you safe places to land, so that at the very least you have a safe haven, a checkpoint you can have a save file set at, so that you don't, if you're trying to like cross all of human space, you don't get blasted halfway through and have to start from the beginning again.
Yeah. A little bit less annoyance, a little bit more entertainment.
And I mentioned earlier the idea of more mechanics around scanning and more counterplay that will be a thing.
And personally, I'd like to get to so actually in the game there's already some introduced pirate variants, which are kind of sort of like Marauders, except noticeably different in that Marauders are very combat only focused. And these kind of ideas of pirate variants was to have the regular ship adjusted to a specific pirate role. So say smuggling. So with a kind of interference plating and hiding cargo like that. Kind of hit and run. So that would also kind of rely on a couple other changes with balance. But otherwise, these kind of like variants that they're not super good in one thing, but they lean towards one direction. So I like to get to those. But we'll see. Anything else big for 10.5?
I don't know if we want to give an exhaustive list. We'll keep some stuff a surprise.
So I will answer this, and this kind of skips the next question. Well, the next question is why only 3, and it was to having 3 questions. It's because people didn't put stuff in. The one after that, this kind of follows it. Araki asks, when Korg? He specifically put his dash Araki after that question.
We don't know. It could be someone else.
Could be. You're right. I originally would have liked to expand the Korg for 10.5, but some of it is kind of waiting on Todd right now, who's working on the newer sprites for them. I had talked to him a couple times over the past week or so and asked him what his schedule's kind of looking like, and it's kind of a hit or miss thing at the moment. So I wouldn't plan on that being a 10.5 thing, but as for Iraqi's when, probably more likely 10.7. So. And that's in regards to for people who don't know, there was we like to expand the Korg beyond their current placeholder status. Because for the longest time, the 2 ships in the game right now and a lot of their content in general, it's not 2 years away. It's been just that, a placeholder. So we like to give them a little bit more ships, a little bit more kind of personality to their species, kind of logistics, mainly just that kind of logistics, and have a little bit more of a variance in between their various locations. So kind of have that to look forward to. That and balance, because right now they're not particularly balanced to where we'd like them to be. The Skylines is actually a little bit stronger than we'd like it to be, but just kind of like various Korg things in the future. So we'll get to those eventually as well. Mr. G, I'll answer that later. There's a question related to that.
Yeah, the Weird Nut says pirates should have forged IFF or something so that not all ships immediately recognize them as pirates. Yeah, that is something that I've also thought of adding as a mechanic. Something where you can install this outfit that makes it so that if you're hostile to a certain faction, like say the Navy, they won't immediately notice that you're actually a pirate. Only when they scan you would they make it so that you would actually be attacked at that point. Something else that has been talked about for a while now that I don't know, this feels a bit further off, but pirates should not be like suicidal and attack every single merchant they see. Pirates should be a lot more pick and choose about, is this merchant something I can actually take down, or at the very least threaten enough that it will dump its cargo for me to pick up? And in that sense, I'm imagining a scenario or a setup where pirates and merchants are not always hostile to one another. Pirates only start attacking merchants after they feel like they can take on a merchant, and merchants only attack pirates in self-defense. Mm-hmm. So merchants wouldn't be picking fights with pirates. Like not every oil tanker that's going past Somalia is like, oh, a pirate, let's go straight for them and fire on them, you know?
Or vice versa, not everyone's driving at it in a little tiny
yeah,
tugboat.
not every pirate tugboat is like, all right, there's the target, and it's just one. It's us versus them. One little tugboat versus.
There's the U.S. Navy. We're going in.
Yeah.
That's not to say we can't have that period. Like, every now and then there's probably some rambunctious, like, oh, I can take on the whole world, and then but just kind of more away from that whole pirates are going in to die without knowing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's the next? Go to the next question here. This is one we get a lot. Do you have a status update on the Republic campaign? As far as we know, Warlord Mike, who is kind of the pseudo lead in that project, said he'd like to get to the intro to it by the end of this year. That's all I know on the information, but we would like to get to it eventually, regardless.
All right. Next question. What's going on with the timer ship? It's being replaced with a new timer mechanic, which will likely be in 0.10.5. So if you're not aware, we have some missions where the player is told, oh, go to this location and wait for a bit. Right now, that wait for a bit is we have an invisible ship that flies towards the player and has an explosive weapon that it tries to attack you with that does very little damage, so you will not even notice it. But this thing has so little health that it damages itself, blows itself up, or disables itself, and then the act of disabling itself or blowing itself up is what triggers something to happen. It's very janky.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny that MZ added this, because this was MZ's thing. He added this because it worked. He probably should have just made a new feature for it. But you know what? We've been stuck with it.
Thanks, MZ. Yeah.
But we now have a pull request that adds timers as a proper mechanic to missions. So we can actually say, after so many frames, do this thing. So all the timer ships should probably be replaced.
Ships? There's more than one?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think so.
Is there? I might be forgetting one.
I think there's at least two. And I know that if a timer ship isn't used, there's a few other locations. Like there's a mission in the Wanderer campaign where you're told, hey, go observe the two core factions fighting. But that is based off of whether or not you have, or whether or not a specific ship has died or gotten disabled in the two fleets that are fighting each other. And that ship can be repaired, which means the objective is the technical objective is to disable that ship. If that ship gets repaired, you no longer have the objective complete. Therefore, you get the message that you completed the objective, but then you return to the destination and then you can't complete it because actually the ship got repaired, but without you realizing it. There's some other finicky stuff with it. Okay, I'm only seeing one timer ship. Maybe it is just the one.
Yeah, I thought it was just the one.
But I think part of the point though is we don't
There's
have more timer ships because it
Oh.
doesn't work very well. Go ahead,
Oh,
Warp.
warp.
there's the timer ship from Sad Archie, and then there's a timer ship used in the Remnant mission to visit Aesiolanus and wait for an ion storm. But that's a different ship. It's called the Ion Timer ship.
Oh yeah.
I see.
Okay, that one would actually probably stay because the timers would not work with that.
Okay, for those who were wondering who just randomly started talking, that is Warp. He's another one of the devs. I'm happy he unmuted, and he does have a voice.
So Hector says one thing that's nice about the timer ship rather than just a regular timer is that it requires you to actually sit still and drift like what the story says. Well, the important thing is that we're actually keeping that mechanic as a feature of the timers, of the timer mechanic. So the way that the pull quest currently has it set up is that it can require you to be moving slowly for the timer to actually start ticking down. That way, it is like how the timer ship is now, where you have to be sitting still, because the reason the timer ship works to make it so you have to sit still is it's very slow. So you actually have to be sitting still for it to actually catch up to you and start attacking you and kill itself.
Hmm.
Yeah, and 2 people have linked the timer pull quest in chat if you want to take a look at it.
Ashel Gara on Twitch says, I absolutely love the semi-living remnant ships. I fly a Peregrine?
Peregrine.
All right. Everywhere. That doesn't require higher combat stats. Any progress being made on that storyline? Right now, it's kind of waiting on Zichus, who's the lead for the remnant, to work on some content. So there are a lot of plans for further content. Yes, I will say that.
All right, let's go to the next question from the spreadsheet here. What's the plan for making NPCs that are scanning you not fly right on top of you? Fly away, and they can't fly on top of you. I mean, so part of it is that scanners work the quickest when you are the closest to your target. So it makes sense for the NPCs to fly directly on top of you. I will admit, though, it does look weird. So
it could be a matter of changing how long or short it does take again. Scanning's always been this kind of balancing act, so bounce back and forth in the future. Who knows?
Benny says you can also game the system by killing the timer ship with a heavy rocket. Yeah. Since the timer ship takes explosive damage and only explosive damage, well, if you have an explosive weapon, just shoot it at a nearby asteroid and hope that the timer ship is close enough to get hit. It will die. So that's another reason why the timer ship system is not the best.
All right. Next question. Is there a plan eventually for a more detailed tutorial that explains uncommon hotkeys and or unintuitive mechanics like boarding?
So go ahead if you want to say something.
You
Okay.
I was just going to say we recently did include a bunch of tooltips for hotkeys, but I'm assuming this is asking for ones that aren't listed there.
Yeah, the tooltips we added were for all the preferences and controls, which were already stuff that you could see and at least the button is there to hit and play around with, so you could figure it out on your own at some point. Now the tooltip is there to actually tell you what each control does. But as for hotkeys that are somewhat hidden, if you go to the game right now and go to, say, the outfitter, hit F1. That will display a help pop-up that tells you, hey, here's how the outfitter works. That F1 key showing that help pop-up is new for the latest update. Previously, that dialogue that pops up when you do that would only appear once unless you went into your settings and went to the show first time help setting and reset it so it would show all the first time help again. But it would show everything again, which could be a pain if you only want to see one thing. Almost all the hotkeys that aren't displayed somewhere else are displayed in those help dialogues. So that is the tutorial for you. As far as unintuitive mechanics like boarding,
I think the question there is like, because a lot of boarding has to do with you don't go defensive stuff or else that works against you, sort of deal. So
and that's just kind
that
of a problem with the boarding system.
yeah, it kind of runs into us needing to take a look back into boarding again.
Yeah, so if you're not aware, the way boarding works is your crew has an attack and defense stat, and your enemies have an attack and defense stat. Your enemies look at your attack and defense and say, okay, what are my best odds here? Like, do I have enough attack so that if I attacked them, their little defense would not work? So if you have low defense and they have high attack, they attack you, or high relative to your defense. Here's the problem. It doesn't actually roll attack versus defense. It looks at if you attack and they attack, it rolls attack versus attack. It's only when they defend that does it roll your attack damage against their defense damage. When you defend, does it roll their attack damage against your defense damage? Really, what should probably happen is that it's always attack damage versus defense damage, regardless of who's deciding to attack or not. So yeah, that is unintuitive. It's not explained, but it's one of those things that's probably going to change. So there's not too much use in really explaining it right now. Kim says, what is the direction of the game? It seems like there's no plans. What?
Make stuff.
We're talking about it right now.
Yeah. Storylines, making the game a little bit more well-rounded.
You
mechanics.
laugh, I
do.
Part of it is that most of the content is made by whoever's opening pull quests. And we review pull quests. Therefore, the direction of the game is in some sense dictated by who decides to open pull quest for what and where is interest in the game. Not necessarily like, oh, we say these are the few things we're going to look at for this update. Therefore, if you open a pull quest that's not for this, we're not going to look at it. So there is some sense in which the direction of the game is very chaotic. But there is still a direction that we have.
I'd say more open-ended than...
Yeah. It's a very open-ended direction.
Part 2, the Free World campaign. Is your question kind of more so story beyond the Free Worlds campaign then? The main focus for the next for the relative future would probably be to finish the other 2 human storylines, as well as some other content along the way, because we can multitask. There could be stories for other species or whatnot, but mainly it's finishing the rest of the human story. As for anything beyond that, so like I know every now and then some people are like, what if there's like a big galactic event or something like that? We're not really planning anything that far of the sort, or at least not anything anytime soon, like for a long time.
The Yuzhan Vong will not attack.
Yes, these we're not. There will be no Yuzhan Vong in the sky. But yeah, so it's just kind of tying up loose ends, making the game a little bit more neat, using more mechanics to kind of solve some other things that, for example, like the timer ship, things like that. So
yeah, so Roadrunner says, we've been lagging on some fronts if you want an insider opinion, but we are trying to pick things up. Roadrunner says, I think the biggest gap we have right now is a lack of code reviewers. If you're able to review code, please do so. Yes. And yes. Benny agrees, we really need code reviewers. Yeah, there's a lot of the pull quests that are open are actually more so code related than they are content related. A lot of the content stuff, like new missions that people open, generally speaking, actually gets done pretty quickly. The stuff that sticks around a long time is like the really big stuff, like, oh, here's a whole new faction or here's a whole new storyline. That does get done in due time. But most of what we have open is code pull requests. I personally wouldn't say that we're lagging behind on some fronts. I feel like it's more like we're just stagnating at the moment. Because, like I mentioned earlier, we peaked at 185 pull requests. And we've been floating around the 140, 150 range for some time now. So really it's just a matter of, can we look at all the code pull requests? And, I mean, like you said, don't have too many code reviewers that would help along with that.
Hmm.
Lemuria says, so about the community going in all directions, do the devs acknowledge that? Do they choose to pass over the comment on purpose? Not sure what you're talking about.
I think
In
it's
terms
this
of the second
comment.
comment.
Lemuria answered the direction of the game comment by saying, the direction of the game is all directions. Everyone goes in their own separate ways depending on what they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Some do plugins, some make new ships, someone's probably making new storylines, someone's looking for ways to optimize that and things in a new engine. I mean, yeah, that's generally what's happening. There's different facets of content creating.
Is there an application process to review code? There is not. Just go to GitHub, go to the open pull requests. If you have the know-how, go ahead and comment on things. Like, I will say that part of the code review is understanding how our engine is set up. So if you didn't know, we don't have some like third-party engine, like it's not built on Unity or Unreal or what have you. Endless Sky is its own engine. So if you have the time, you can go ahead and dig into the engine and just take a look at how things are structured, how things are done. And I would also advise you, if you're looking to become a code reviewer, look at other code reviewers' work. Look at like comments that I or Warp or Quick make on people's pull requests, or Hurl, or Rising Leaf. Because we're the ones who have been around for a good while and know what we're doing in terms of code review. And I actually mentioned earlier in the stream how there's some things that might trip people up, like how like the order in which things load means that you can't look at things that have been defined while something else is loading. That's the type of mistake that you want to be able to catch if you understand how our engine is set up and how like the order that things are done in the engine. Roadrunner says, speaking of which, I recall there being some plans to officially create a guide to reviewing/content creating and a list of things that we need help on. Any plans on that front? So I know that I believe it was Benny, right? There was a question of, this isn't the exact same thing, but a content style guide. I think any sort of reviewing guide would need to come after a style guide, because we would want something to say like, hey, here's what we're looking for in terms of how the game is structured and how missions look. And then we can say, okay, here's how you as a reviewer or a content creator should approach this. Yeah, Rising says there is a code style guide, luckily. There is. I think we should make it a bit more visible, because right now, yeah, that was not a question, that was a comment. There is. But we should make it a bit more visible, I feel. And it's probably worth looking through it to see if there's anything that we could add to. Because there are certain things that we've kind of decided over the years on our own that I feel like aren't on the style guide. And there is also a case of, I believe the style guide said something that we don't actually do. Somebody opened a pull request for this. It was, I think, we have various functions that are prefixed with standard, but we also have using namespace standard in all of our C++ files, not in the header files, but the CPP files. And somebody said, well, the style guide says don't do this. Why is this done? And there is a bit of a caveat, I think, in the style guide that's like, unless it is something that is commonly used that could, or I think it doesn't even have that caveat. I think, like Tahouch said, oh, the reason we do this is because these are functions that, or these are common function names, so it makes sense to prefix them so there's never any confusion as to where this function is coming from. And there are also some that I think, if we don't prefix them with standard, certain compilers get confused as to which like move function it is. So those are things that we should be putting in the code style guide. Like, hey, these are the exceptions to this rule. And there's probably some other rules that we've thought of over the years. It's like, hey, we could add this. And there's also, I feel like, in this distinction of we can have a content style guide and also a content creator's guide, I feel like we could have a code style guide and a coder's guide. Like some of this, like the thing I just mentioned with the load order, we could explain that to somebody. Like, hey, here's the order that the game does things in. Don't do these things at these steps because X, Y, Z. I feel like that doesn't really fit a code style guide, but it would fit a coder's guide, if you get what I'm kind of talking about there. Although maybe the distinction is not really important; they should just be the same file anyway. But there are things that we could add to the code style guide stuff. I see comments on the Remnant, the state of the Remnant in the Deep. Legendary M says, I do wish the Deep were a bit more, or could be a bit more sympathetic. Now they just seem like cold-blooded mad scientists who sacrifice everything in the name of dubious science. That's one character. I will say that. That is one character. There is a sense in which like the Deep is a large organization. So, but there is that one character. There's only really that one character that you interact with in terms of, I imagine, referring to the Remnant surveillance stuff. So, at a certain point, it's like there just is an other story, and that's something that's kind of been said about the pirates. It's like we don't have any story that really digs into the state and story behind the pirates in the galaxy. Therefore, they're very one note, and it's very easy for someone to say, "Oh, all pirates are such and such." When it's like, well, there's parts of the story that kind of suggest otherwise, but if you look at most of the story, then I guess sure.
Yeah. Hackers Marion says, "Will there be a way to switch between new and old designs after the art overhaul?" Are you saying the Korg art overhaul, or do you just mean in general? Because are they in this chat here? It doesn't look like it. I'm assuming you're listening on Twitch, but if you mean between like different patches of the game, I think your best bet would be a plugin, or someone makes a plugin that kind of this plugin is from designs of this patch or so and so. That would probably follow with the Korg as well. Someone would probably make a plugin to do it, so it wouldn't be like an option within the game itself. But it'd probably be a plugin. Okay.
Roadrunner says, speaking of pirates, what are the plans of expanding the current pirate campaign pull quest? I will admit, there's not really... I've mentioned that I would like to see it expanded, so that it's a bit more on par with the Free World's introduction and the introductions that are going to be made for the other human campaigns. But there's not really been any talk on how exactly that would be done yet. I did say, though, later that I actually would be fine with accepting the pirate campaign intro being a bit smaller for the time being, but once the pirate campaign actually gets going, I would like the size to be on parity with the other stuff. But if we can at the very least get what's been done in the game, then that'd be fine with me.
The current pirate campaign PR is actually very, very, very short. There's only a few editions right now. It's not really in a position to be in the game or reviewed at the moment, but I would assume, from what I know that Lake has planned, it would be kind of like Derpy is saying, a shorter intro to kind of introduce these little nuances at the start. So, just kind of a case by case thing. Well, next question in the Campfire chat submissions is very, very much for you, Derpy. So, and it's what Legendary has been wanting to ask. So,
hold on. I'm still looking at some of this deep stuff. So, Legendary M says the Deep Remnant Division is headed by Ivan, who is not really sympathetic. Notably, Ivan is a lone research head. Like he has his own science team, and that's his own project at first. Eventually, the Deep does pick up on the project and like, okay, there's something interesting going on here. But he's not necessarily the one who's like super in charge of everything at that point. Up until the Deep government gets involved, which I think is toward the very end of that string of missions, it is all him. But after that point, there is a bit more involvement from the rest of the Deep. Although that string of missions just has not been expanded upon in some time. So
I think
really,
you
it's
said
just a
you'd
matter
like
of
to
I
kind
want to
of
go through
add
that
more.
at some point and add more to it.
Yeah.
The state of Remnant content has outpaced the state of Deep content. I'll tell you that. It's kind of hard to be writing stories for the game while at the same time reviewing 151 pull quests.
That kind of is relevant to the next question. So, which I guess I really know. Read. What are the current plans for the Bun Rodia? What is the outline of this story? What will it be involved? Are they going to have a campaign, or are they text wrap?
Are they
Side
side
characters
characters
with
for a campaign for another race? Even the vaguest idea is fine. Current plans is to wait until other stuff is done. So I will say my original plans for the Bunradia were that they would open up their planets to you after the Wanderer campaign. So the Bunradia and the Korath have had interactions with one another in the past. And similarly to how the Korath raided the High, they also attempted to raid the Bunradia. But after the Korath raid stopped, the Bunradia are like, well, all right, that's cool. We're not going to try and go to them now because they tried to attack us and we don't like them. So we're just going to stay here. The plan was once the Wanderer campaign really gets going, or the back half of the Wanderer campaign is finished, then the Bunradia would be involved. They would kind of look at the Korath faction and be like, yo, what in the world happened to you guys? Because part of it was that the Bunradia and the Korath were actually on friendly terms in the past, and there was some instigating event that made it so that now they were at each other's throats. But there was a sense of the Bunradia still have a sense of like brotherly love for the Korath. So seeing the Korath like down on their luck, like in some sense on the brink of extinction, they'd be like, "Yo, like, can we help you there, dude?" So part of the plan was they would help the Wanderers to help rebuild the Korath. But that's contingent on the Wander stuff being done, which is actually something Marksman's been working on, trying to get the Wander stuff wrapped up. So it might be that I stay with that old idea, but just get the Wanderer stuff done first, and then bring that old idea in. As far as if that didn't happen, how they would be involved, honestly not super sure. I did want to have some sort of like medium-sized storyline that was entirely contained within Bunradia space, but it wouldn't be like on the size of a campaign. It would just be something to get to know them a bit more, get to know their situation, know the history, help them out a bit, and maybe get a bit more of their tech, you know? But nothing too crazy, nothing like super expansive campaign-style stuff. Just like, oh, hey, here's a few like medium-sized strings of missions to help us out. Yeah, Benny says waiting on Marksman. To be fair, we're all busy with non-ES stuff. Yeah, that is something of note. Kind of going along with what was mentioned earlier, of like the direction of things. It's very dependent on who has time when. This is just a hobby project. No one's getting paid for this, so the rate at which things happen is just dependent on how many people have free time around the same time that they can work on things together. Benny says, I make time, even when I have an exam in 3 days, yeah.
SirDerpyHorse, I think I said that right, says if the Korath exiles now have automata, does that mean the Remnant will get raided by the automata? As far as I know, Zit just has plans for there to be a little bit more battling between the Remnant and the Korath post current Wanderer campaign. What's been finished so far. So yeah, there is an overall idea that the Korath will be raiding the Remnant at a little bit higher, larger capacities than they are now. So as to what extent that goes, though, I couldn't tell you. That'd be a Zitch's question.
All right. Are multiple characters allowed to have the same name? What if a character shares a first name with some other minor character from a different storyline? I
Do
will
you
say
mean
that
within different stories?
yeah, between different storylines, but characters with
Okay.
the same name, or at least the
Okay.
same first name. I would say that generally, I would like us to avoid having characters with the same
Yeah.
first name. The main reason I would say we would keep a first name that matches a character from another story is if the name is in some way important to the story. Like maybe the name is a reference, or maybe there's some significance to the name you chose that kind of plays into the story in some way. Then it would make sense to say like, okay, we'll keep it for this storyline, even if there's some other storyline that happened to use that name randomly. Now, there should be a cap on that. We shouldn't be using the same name like 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
But if there's 2 characters with the same name and the name is of significance in the new content, I would say, okay, it's fine to keep it. But we have in the past, when people have pull quested new storylines, avoided having characters with the same name, even similar names. Like I know that I think I renamed one of the characters in some of the deep missions at one point because it was too close to like the name of a character in another storyline.
It's kind of something to easily avoid. I don't unless there's like a super good reason. I don't think it's hard to ask there to be a different name from something that's already existing, unless because usually the like in what case would that actually be the case then? Like if characters have a similar name, would that mostly just be a preference of the creator who's making the new part of the story?
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of please avoid it
Yeah,
if you can.
and I mean, it depends on how you refer to the character in the story too, because some characters we
Yeah.
refer to by last name, some characters we refer to by first name, some characters kind of switch back and forth. But if you have a character with the same first name, but they're only ever referred to by their last name, then I mean it's fine they have the same first name because it's probably not going to
Yeah.
create much confusion, because normally the character is referred to by the last name.
I think it would also depend on how the first name is written. Uh, Also, kind of more importantly, with different species. If it's like something special, like Katya, having another Katya might be a little bit odd, but
Yeah.
having another like Dan or something, that'd be different.
Hmm. Yeah, we should. Yeah, we should avoid having like super major characters that share a name with someone else.
Yeah. Katya's full name is Katerina, but
All right. Would it be possible to have an alert when looting a ship that if you then capture it, it won't be able to move or leave the system, etc.? Now, this is
uh,
something that comes up when people are like, "Oh, I'm going to board the ship. Let me take its engines. Let me take its generator. Let me take its hyperdrive. Oh wait, I want to capture it now. Oh wait, I captured it successfully, but I can't
yeah,
do anything with it because I looted it entirely." Some of that, I will admit, is on you.
yeah.
But
I feel like that's kind of a you took its engines. What were you expecting?
we probably could
But
add some sort of warning though, because
yeah,
we already have the flight checks when you are on a planet and you're taking off that say, "Oh hey, you can't take off with this ship because it doesn't have engines." We could probably copy paste some of that so that it also works when you're trying to capture a ship. When you try to capture a ship, run flight checks on whatever you're capturing and say, "Oh hey, you can't capture this because of X, Y, Z." Or whether
Mhm.
rather, are you sure you want to capture this because it can't leave the system? Now, in sometimes you can, like, you already have a place in system to land with it, so that wouldn't be as much of a problem. But it probably is still something worth telling you. Although
Yeah.
then we would want to skip that step for fighters and drones because they can never leave the system on their own anyway. But
It'd still be kind of a here's a warning
yeah,
that results in you can't it won't leave the system, but it won't be are you sure you want to remove the engines from the ship? Because that's kind of a you should know what you're doing at that point.
so we could, but it's low priority, I will say.
Yeah. Um so earlier who was it? Someone asked about what's going on with the Gegno and the relay, so that's kind of leading to this question. I think it'd be cool if we could reverse engineer relay technology, like for example, make a high capacity fuel tank or a highly efficient ram scoop that might make text wording more sense from the relay megastructure between the two stars. What are your thoughts on this idea? So I'm going to straight up say that if anything non-relay touched relay technology, they would die or become part of the hive mind. That's a
Left, center,
very
right.
generic. Yeah. Relay technology is very bio-focused. So the ship flying around in the relay systems, the Solemnity, the View Ire, that whole thing is an organism. If you don't already know, it's kind of like a living ship. It doesn't have like an internal structure to it for like beings or whatnot. That whole thing is one large living mass. So it's also evident that on the planets when you land on them, it says that the surfaces are kind of like living ish, or they're kind of like this eerie living entity. If you don't already get that from it, that's kind of what it is. So if you try to do anything with relay anything, good luck. um I will say though that the structure between the two stars, um that thing itself may not be like some giant living entity, but it probably has um a good portion of it is alive or living, considering it's active. I won't say what it's for. I won't say if you'll ever not be able to like fly near it, quotations mark landing on it for something. But as for any sort of will insert person here be able to take insert relay tech here and do something with it, that's pretty unlikely. As for plans for them in the Gegno, I have said it elsewhere. The Gegno, I plan on them having kind of a major campaign, but within their area. I have been kind of rethinking it lately because something that was brought up the other day is how the players' interaction with campaigns should be and whether or not they should be the hero of everything or not. So I've actually kind of been considering maybe the Gegno campaign is a bit more. The players shouldn't have like if the player does this, then certain side wins or something like that. I did think that'd be cool if like maybe there's different options of how it goes. Like the player helps the sin win the war or whatever. Helps the buy win. Doesn't help either, neither win or something like that. But I was thinking maybe I can lean that to being a bit more randomized or not directly the players' acts of doing it. So that's my idea with the Gegno. For the Roulette, um, they're as said in the game, or I mean, I guess I say it, but it's not really explicitly said in the game. Besides the end, they're a long gone species. Besides what's presented, yeah. Whoever you side with in the Kingdom War loses. Ayo, sure. No, but for the relay, it's kind of going to be mostly kind of like the Emerald Sword stuff. It's going to be what's the word? Kind of artifact-ish, archaeological, where it's you learn a little bit more through little snips of lore throughout the game, but you don't like. There's not gonna be like a direct huge mission or something like that. Um, that's kind of something I was going to talk to Derpy with eventually. Was maybe there's some ties between the Watchers and the Relay because Watchers are a species he's playing that kind of like watch things from afar, so maybe they know a little bit more about the Relay. But as for some big major thing, probably not. But for kind of spooky, eerie side things that you wish you probably didn't know later on, maybe. So that's with the relay. Next question is, what is the criteria for person to get their own personship in Endless Sky? So personships generally we are a little bit stingy on. We don't want to give every single person who helps with the game a personship because then that starts to get a little excessive. A kind of reference to this question, or like probably an indirect answer, is we recently, or I'm the one who hit the button, merged a personship for the reviewer teams in Endless Sky, so it doesn't exactly represent each individual like with a ship, but it kind of represents the teams as a whole, and individuals from each team put in like different quotes for them. But overall, generally, what qualifies for it is what has in the past. I'll start there. Is someone who has been like at the core of the development. So like people who've been around for a very long time, or have put excessive amounts of lines into the game, or generally it's kind of picked out from those like developers or kind of higher content creators. So it's not something we want to abuse or do too much of. And generally when it's brought up, it's usually a kind of a why. Or some of us don't even like Derpy, for example. He's kind of just whatever about it. A lot of people are like, "Why don't you have a person ship? You're the lead dev of the game," and he's kind of like, "It's not on my list."
Yeah,
So
the number one criteria is, does the person want it?
yeah,
And the number two is, do enough of us who are deeply involved in the development of the game agree?
yeah. So it's kind of a mix of those, pretty much.
All
Isn't
right,
there a frequency problem already? Yes and no.
we could
So
fix that.
yeah, we could fix it. I've for the longest time kind of been thinking maybe we need to kind of make them spawn less, because we were talking about how they were on escape velocity earlier, and that's kind of where it comes from. In escape velocity, person ships were a lot more rare than they are in this game. In that game, you'd be very lucky to see one every hour, if it was one of the rare ones. Sometimes there are like these like little trader ships or something like that. But that's a little bit of a different story. But I like to kind of tone them down a bit. As for frequencies with the existing ones, it's kind of a balancing act. When the Gefus first went in, that kind of showed up almost every time the trigger happened for first ship, so everyone saw a battleship like every 30 minutes. It's just kind of a balancing act, and yeah, I like to kind of tone them back a little bit. So
Yeah,
I
so
know some people actually. Sorry, go ahead.
what it does is it makes a spawn attempt once every, on average, 10 minutes. What it's actually doing is rolling a random number that if it lands on 1, or if it lands on 0, actually, then it'll try and spawn a person ship. But in that random number, it comes out to, on average, once every 10 minutes. But there's also the fact that once that number rolls 0, there's still a chance a person ship couldn't spawn, because it goes through the frequencies of all the person ships and says, okay, which one should I spawn by rolling a random number for all the frequencies. But there's also a chance that nothing will spawn. And I think what's
Yep.
happened is, as we've added more, Java has
Mhm.
just posted the game rule. That second one, the no person spawn wait. As we've added more person ships, the sum total of all frequencies has increased, but this no person spawn wait has not increased with that. So
Mhm.
we've just made it so that there's, when a spawn attempt does happen, it's more likely that a ship will spawn with that spawn attempt, rather than a spawn attempt happening but still nothing spawning because of this no person spawn wait. So we should
Yeah.
probably just increase the no person spawn wait instead of increasing the spawn attempt time.
Yeah.
Either that, or just massively reduce the frequencies of all of the person ships.
Some of them also only spawn in certain areas, so
Mhm.
that could also factor into it.
Yeah, that no person spawn wait happens everywhere, regardless of location.
Okay.
So we probably would need to be a bit more careful of. I don't think just popping that one way up would work necessarily, because then
Mhm.
we would have person ships. I mean, maybe if that's the desire, there's certain person ships in certain regions that would just almost never spawn.
Yeah, because there are some person ships that are a little bit more Easter egg than they are a person ship.
Hmm.
So, like for example, the space rock, Becca's. That's kind of more of an Easter egg, so it's a little bit rare sight, and yes, you can capture it. Meanwhile, other person ships are more specifically just to represent that person in the game than it is like an interactive person ship. So, Tranquility as well. That's kind of like a little nod to, what was it, Firefox?
Firefly,
Firefly, sorry. Yeah,
Firefox.
I
It's the
I was thinking,
Firefox browser ship.
yeah, I was thinking of some other sci-fi with like a fox fighter or something. Um, Real quick, I'll answer this by legendary. What about the Navy battleship? Is it going to be implemented? Um, that's kind of waiting on later sections of the Republic campaign of whether or not that'll be implemented. I know there's still a little bit in the air about how whether or not the Navy should get new ships or not, but that's probably going to be quite a little while we wait for that, because that's kind of later late Navy campaign. So
All right, let's move on to the next question here. If
all right.
Endless Sky ever becomes content complete, where we decide to not add any more alien races, what would there be to do? engine improvements, more fleshing out of the existing races. I will first. That's very far off, so sometimes I don't even bother even thinking of this because it's so far away. But maybe as we get closer, it's probably a bit more worth thinking of. I think both of these answers, or both of these like questions that are kind of answers, are what we would probably do. Even if we do have all of the galaxy filled with alien races, we say we're not going to add any more. There's still a lot to do within the alien races. So instead of like digging outward and making our hole more like wider, we would want to dig deeper. Because I mean, we still get new storylines in human space all the time, but there's not very many like small storylines in Korth space. I think there's like one or two. There's a few in Coalition space. I think Coalition space has the most non-campaign mission strings in it
Or
compared to anyone
non-human.
that's not human space.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a fair few in high space. So I think high and Coalition
yeah.
are probably close. I don't think there's anything in Wander space that's not the campaign. Remnant has some side plot type stuff to it, but I feel like it all kind of ties into the main campaign still of the Remnant campaign or of the Remnant storyline. So
I feel like it's
the Remnant's very intertwined.
I feel like it's almost more likely that we end up hitting that we don't want to do any more alien factions thing before we even finish all the stories for them. So
Yeah.
we'll have a lot of time probably focused on doing more stories for those alien factions in the game. So
And then engine improvements, that's always going to be happening. We're always
Yeah.
going to be thinking of like new mechanics that would be nice to add, like even like new plug-in features and whatnot. Because what's it? We have Rising is working on. I think I've mentioned this before. How would you like it if you could go into your game, go to your plugins menu, and then straight from the plugins menu, download a plugin? That is being worked on. We also have some stuff from what's his name? Is it Bean? Git? I'm forgetting his name. Let me pull up the pull request here. Git, that's what it is. I was close. Bead has been working on some other enhancements to plugins. I'll actually link the discussion post for you guys to look at. It's discussion 8932, kind of talking about ways that we could expand and enhance the plugin experience, so to speak. Fisher says music is still needed or still needs to happen. Yes, that as well.
Yep.
Sam has a pull request that adds a music system to the game. We do have a music system actually already, but it's very rudimentary. We don't use it because it doesn't really work with what we need. So Sam is basically just massively enhancing that. Then Fisher also mentions Unicode support and translations. That's another thing we could work on. So there's lots of stuff that we could work on that's not strictly adding new alien factions to the game. Mr. G asks, once the Navy campaign is completed, will it be mutually exclusive with the Free Worlds campaign? Will you have to pick sides and be able to complete one and the other will be locked out? Or will you be able to do both campaigns? It'll be mutually exclusive.
It'll be exclusive.
So it'll either be you choose Free Worlds, you choose Navy, you choose Syndicate, you choose Pirates, because the Pirate campaign has also been something that's been talked about. People have been talked about adding an independent campaign of some sort. Merchant campaign that Benny just mentioned. There's been some murmurs of a deep campaign, although I don't think that'll happen, honestly. But these will be mutually exclusive with one another. The main thing is that each campaign is supposed to go along the timeline of the Civil War. And at the end, if you've done it before, the pugs show up, stuff happens. But there's really no way for you to go back to the start and do it again without starting a new pilot. Therefore, for each pilot, these main campaigns will be mutually exclusive. Pug time travel.
For the human. Yeah.
Yes. There are other campaigns in the future that are planned that will also be mutually exclusive with one another. So we are going to have mutually exclusive storylines at some point. Right now, you can kind of do everything. There are parts within storylines that are mutually exclusive with one another. Like you can make one choice but not another. I mean, the Free Worlds campaign has this. You can't do both endings of the Free Worlds campaign at the same time. So there is going to be some sense of mutual exclusion between storylines. Part of the point of that, though, is it gives a bit more replayability. You could go back through, make different choices, choose a different side. You wouldn't be able to do everything in one go.
Iraqi has this kind of with the coalition campaigns too. So
Yes,
same thing
yes.
with like the Free Worlds versus Syndicate versus Navy. The coalition's gonna have either Heliarch versus Lunarium. So yep. Really campaign? No. Maybe in a plugin. I've been thinking about that. Maybe I make a plugin where the relay exists and the game never did.
So next question. Will you release all the questions that were put in the box after the end of the Campfire chat? So I will say these Campfire chats are recorded, and we do read every question. So I'm not really sure what use there would be in dumping all the questions. But I mean, I guess if you really wanted to see everything that was asked, then we could dump those.
If you want.
Sure, since you haven't read all my questions, Derpy, you lie. I'm reading every single question in this spreadsheet here. These are all sourced from the survey, which you all have access to. Yes, timestamps, says Lemur. Timestamp the video, maybe. I mean, so these do go on YouTube. Hector copies them off of Twitch and uploads them to YouTube. So somebody in the comments could timestamp, but yeah. Hector says timestamps are a lot of work. Iraqi says, might be worth having the current questions typed out in a TXT file and just overwrite as you change. Then you have a TXT visible on screen so it's easier to find. I guess. I don't know.
Mr. G asks, will we see more tier 3 tech in the game in the future? Right now we only have the Arfecta, Quarg, and Archons. Sort of. So we're trying to avoid adding too much higher tech to the game because that kind of starts to be a little bit more competitive, and then it starts to the more high tech you add to the game, the less imposing the Quarg and the Archons and the Pugs seem, which we don't want to lose that kind of storytelling aspect of them. I think the Watchers are planning to be around tier 3, right?
Approaching
or
that,
like
yeah.
approaching it, not maybe right there. The Relay were tier 3. So as for like a whole brand new species that is tier 3 and super strong and kind of like opposing the Korg, probably not.
So
But,
the pecking order is Drac and Pug on roughly the same level. Korg below them, everyone below the Korg.
Yep.
No one can be stronger than the Quarg. No one can be stronger than the Archons. Well, no one new can be stronger than the Quarg. No one new can be stronger than the Archons and slash Drac and the Pug. Something that I've said is we do not want Dragon Ball Z power scaling.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be like, oh, you've reached tier 2 in this storyline. Well, now we're going to go tier 3. New tier 3 villain approaches. Oh, you've beat tier 3? New tier 4 villain approaches. Like, every villain is not necessarily going to be stronger than the last. And part of it is that tier 2 tech almost entirely replaces tier 1 tech. If all we did was increase the strength of the tech levels with each new storyline, or even just like adding more tier 3 stuff, at a certain point, like all the old stuff just becomes useless. We want there to be a bit more of a play between tiers and a lot more variety within tiers. So we want to dig wider, not deeper, like in the sense of tiers. Like each tier itself should be deeper, instead of building up higher. I don't know. There's some analogy there. Ty says tier 2 outfit expansions when. I mean, yeah, there's things that are tier 1 tech you get from tier 1 factions that are still useful in tier 2 because there is no tier 2 replacement for it. And in some sense, I feel like we should never add a tier 2 replacement for it. Because then, like I said, we just kind of get into this power scaling sense of like, oh, everything in the next tier is necessarily stronger than everything in the lower tier. There should be some play there where it's like, okay, some factions have this that's better, some factions have that that's better, even if that faction overall isn't stronger than the other faction overall. Like, I mean, the Wanderer cooling is worse than human cooling on a like ton for ton level.
Yeah.
But
Doesn't be strict comparison.
yeah. So like something the MZ did, it was instead of making it so that the Wanderers and the Korath had every outfit type that the humans had but better, he instead started combining things. So like Wanderer reactors are reactors plus batteries, and their engines are engines plus cooling, and the Korth have shield generator plus hull generation plus battery all in the same outfit. So on a certain level, the mixed outfits should be weaker than a focused outfit of the same size. So
Hmm.
like the coalition has dedicated shield regeneration and dedicated hull repair that ton for ton are stronger than Korth system cores. But if you aren't trying to super focus in on one thing, well, then you have the core system cores as an option, as a way to actually interact with these things.
Hmm. Yeah, preserve busted core with cooling. A lot of the core outfits right now could use some tuning, and we plan on doing that eventually too. So, um,
All right, last question then. Any advice for someone planning to get into video game development?
that is a big question.
That is a big question. So I have a few friends who are in video game dev, and we kind of chat with one another. And I know Sog has talked to some guys over on what was it? You talked to some of the EV guys, right? Who
Yeah.
are still around. I
Mhm.
learned to code first as Weird Night. Yeah. Um, I mean, yeah, that is a very wide question because you could be asking about like how do I build a video game, you know? But you could also be asking about like, well, how do I market my game, or how do I build a community? Like, there's a lot of things that are tied up in this.
Mhm.
So, in some sense, like, it's very difficult to answer.
And are you trying to make your own game? Are you trying to help another team with their game in a certain aspect of it, like code or artwork
Yeah,
or
you starting
story?
from scratch, or are you picking up something that's already been worked on? I would say, unless you are very technically advanced in coding, you should find someone else's engine that already exists. Grab Unreal, grab maybe not Unity, grab Godot. Probably grab Godot because it's open source. Then just kind of play with it. When I first started helping out with Endless Sky, I didn't immediately jump in and try and like take over everything. Um, my conquest started by dividing. No, I'm kidding. I just kind of looked at like what sort of problems does the game have right now? Are there any bugs
Where's
I can
the
help fix?
story?
And I just kind of looked in the code and I was like, okay, this part of the code I kind of understand. Other parts of the code I don't so much. So I'm just going to kind of work in this little part of the code that I understand because I just started looking at it. And if there's any bug or feature related to this piece of the code base that I could work on, oh, I'll just work on it. I'll just throw stuff out there and see what sticks. And then over time, you get a bit more comfortable with what you're looking at, and then you're able to expand out to other areas of the code base if you're looking at something that's already existing. If you're starting from scratch, I personally have not started a project or a massive project from scratch. That is, nothing on the size of Endless Sky at least. But for that, I think that getting an engine that you can understand is a lot more important there. If you are starting a full game from scratch, understand that there's going to be a lot of pitfalls. Don't be afraid to trash an idea. I think that's a big thing that really hangs a
Yeah.
lot of people up, even in just like content creation with Endless Sky, is they get very married to an idea and they're not really willing to let it go. But sometimes you have to realize like what I'm doing here just is not working. I have to start from scratch. I have to toss everything out. But then you can't let that pull you down. You have to realize that even if you have tossed like maybe it could have taken you, maybe you spent a whole month of your free time on something and in the end you had to scratch it. Realize that was not a lost cause. In that month, you grew. You learned stuff you didn't know before. You now know, because that thing didn't work, what does work, or what might work better, or why it didn't work. You learn from your failures. Because if, like, I would suggest watching video game, the video game toolkit, or the gamer's toolkit, or what's the channel name? Game Maker's Toolkit, that's what it is. Watch Game Maker's Toolkit. He has a few videos on this. Like, you have to go through prototyping phases. And there's channels I've seen of guys trying to make their own game, and they go through these same things of like, hey, I had to toss this entire thing just because it was not working. So it's a very it's a creative process, and creative processes are full of destruction. They're full of dead work. Weird Nut says you also kind of want to play to your own strengths. If you like story writing, then write out a plot and variants and conversations. If you like art, start modeling stuff. Yeah. If you're trying to do everything on your own from scratch, then there might be a bit of programmer art in there. Um, yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah.
weirdness is ultimately writing a game from scratch means that you have to be part artist, part programmer, part audio designer, part actor, part writer. Yeah, if you're doing something from scratch, you need to be a lot of things.
Mhm. That usually
And
comes from being a little bit more experienced in the field and having done game
yeah.
projects already. So
Now, having an engine that already exists helps with some of these. Like you might not have to do too much in the audio, or like maybe if you start simple, like start with something like an 8-bit game. 8-bit game. The art doesn't need to be too out of there, out of this world. The audio can be very simplistic. Maybe you don't need any like actors. Maybe the writing can be simplistic, and you just really are focusing on the gameplay, like maybe a platformer or something.
mhm.
Weirdness is ultimately anything that you have a weakness for, you can already find online somewhere. If you're an artist, you can use a complete game engine. If you like coding, steal some
Video.
art and put it together. Yeah, maybe not steal, but
Yeah, don't do
yeah.
that.
Rising Leaf
Please.
says game jams are a good idea to train you. Yeah, and that idea of training, you have to train yourself to be a better video game developer. You're not just gonna right out the gate be amazing at this. Like
Yeah,
I'm
that's
still learning. I would never say that I am like the best video game developer ever. Like I have all this down. I'm still learning. You have to realize it's all just a learning process. You're constantly growing in this hobby, or if you want to make it a job, like even if you're trying to make it a job, you're still growing. Like at my like I don't know what you guys do for work, but I'm in software engineering, and I'm still constantly learning at work. I'm finding out new things about like what I'm working on, and new ways to do things that are better than what I did before. And somewhat annoyingly, I find out in a workplace environment, you do not get the chance to refactor your own code a lot. So in some sense, I try to do it really right the first time. But even then, I still find stuff that I've done even just a few months ago where it's like, dude, this shit. Why did I do it this way? I mean, it works, but why did I do it this way? So I don't know. Sure says a Derpy's advice for game dev: use ChatGPT and AI art. That is not my advice.
you're getting banned
I
if you
will
do
say,
that.
unironically, if you can't do good art, maybe, maybe start with AI art just to fill in the gaps. I will let you know that Steam doesn't like AI art, AI assets, so maybe not try and market your game on Steam. If you are using AI assets, I would highly advise you to make that known. Like tell people, like, hey, these are the AI assets,
Mhm.
because no one likes a shady game that's trying to like steal credit. I've seen I've seen games that try and hide their AI assets, and once people find them out, it's like, bro, you should have just said it.
I
As
do want
long
to
as you're
say though,
honest.
along with this question being focused on game development, the same thing does go for artwork. A lot of people when they start trying to learn how to do arts like models, animation, drawing, painting, all that sort of thing, they're very ambitious at the start, and being ambitious at the start is good in that you want to keep going and learning and do better things, but you always want to try and start with like pretty much anything. So as they were saying with make a game with like even the most basic assets, doing the most basic actions, like even learning code, you learn how to type out hello, right? For the very first thing. Do the same thing with art too. If you feel like you need to rely on AI and stuff to kind of learn, that's fine. Actually, AI is a pretty good way to kind of segue into that. So I'm not gonna sit here and say I hate AI. AI is horrible. It's gonna
It
be
can be a good tool if you know how to
it's a
use it.
good tool, yes. But for learning art, it's also very important to kind of like understand that your first so many models or artwork or whatever you're doing are going to be thrown out or are going to be kind of tossed aside. So always just try and start with anything. Start with an open mind. Um, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I'm linking some channels right now. I linked Game Maker's Toolkit, which is very focused on video game development. I linked Code Aesthetic, which is a more it's more focused on, well, as the name implies, the how your code looks, how you're structuring your code. This is another one that another channel I've looked at before. M Coding, this one has been nice, has a few nice videos. Oh, there's some more. I could just keep adding, like, throwing out YouTube channels. You can probably go looking for stuff, but there's a lot of resources out there. And I think from Game Maker's Toolkit and some of what Code Aesthetic, or some of Code Aesthetic's videos, it's important to not try and hyper optimize. So let me see. Like, this idea of hyper optimization kind of also goes in with some stuff that where is it? Premature optimization. That's the video that Code Aesthetic has. This idea of premature optimization that Code Aesthetic talks about is where, like, don't try and hyper optimize your code before you even know if it's finished. Because you could try and hyper optimize something and then realize, oh, wait, what I have doesn't even really work to begin with. You have to start from scratch, and you just dumped all that time into hyper optimizing it. There's a similar concept in some of the videos that Game Maker's Toolkit has talked about, where it's like, if you're not good at art but you're trying to make a good game, don't worry about the art. Just put in very basic assets that are enough for you to get a feel for the game. A really important part about making a good game is having a good game feel. If your game doesn't feel good to play, even when the graphics are shit, making the graphics better will not help you at all. I know that in, like, AAA games, there's a big emphasis on, like, oh, really amazing, realistic, hyper detailed graphics. Honestly, if you're trying to make a good video game, graphics should be the last thing you're worried about. Now, there is a bit of a give and take. At a certain point, you can have your graphics, like, lean into your gameplay. Graphical design is very important for some games, but I feel like a lot of it isn't necessarily, like, where the importance comes from isn't necessarily in the style of it. It's more like an art design thing than a graphics design thing. If you have a good artwork direction, that, like, let me try and think of some examples. I don't know if this is like a perfect example, but in something like Dark Souls, your opponents will what's the name? What's the word? They'll like, when you can tell they're winding up an attack, they'll choreograph their attacks. That's what it is. They will choreograph their attacks. Given the fact that they choreograph their attacks, you can tell they're going to actually do something. That idea of choreographing, you kind of need to keep in mind for other areas of your game too, in terms of artwork design and stuff like that. Like, if you can't tell something's going to happen, telegraph. That's what That's what it is. Fridger just said. Yeah, telegraph. That's better. Choreograph, telegraph. It's something in there. It's something like that. I've seen games that, like, the gameplay itself is not very well telegraphed. Is maybe what it is. I'm getting very abstract now. I almost feel like I'm losing people. But I mean, I linked Game Maker's Toolkit and Code Aesthetic. They have videos on this type of stuff, especially Game Maker's Toolkit in terms of specifically video game development. There's all sorts of resources on this stuff. I mean, in some sense, you kind of have to have a gut feeling about these things. Sometimes you can't really have a good explanation for something. Sometimes it is just a gut feeling of, like, okay, this feels good. I can't tell you why this is good, but it feels good, where I'm going. Now, maybe your feeling is wrong. That's where you kind of have to get other people involved and can be like, hey, can you test out my game for me? If you look in the credits for Endless Sky, there's a beta tester section. Those people, those names, I don't know any of them. But those are beta testers that MZ reached out to. I'm pretty sure those are friends and family, because at least one of them has MZ's same last name. So if you have friends that you can talk to who are gamers, who can give you good feedback on, like, what you're working on, that can massively help too. And find people who aren't going to just sugarcoat it, be like, oh yeah, this is cool, you know? Like, you want people to give you, like, solid,
You want
like,
criticism.
criticism. Good feedback.
it's actually better to have feedback that says, "Oh, this isn't right," or "This could be changed," than it is to say, "Oh, this is good. I like it."
Yeah.
So, to an extent.
And I don't know how much longer do we want to go with this. Don't be afraid to experiment with ideas. You know, if you
Mhm.
have an idea that you feel like might not work, but if you could pull it off, it would be great. Like, just go for it. See how it works. That kind of goes in again with the idea of like, don't be afraid to have to discard work, because at least you learn something in having done the work.
What I want people to like my game. Yeah,
Yeah.
we
And
all do.
I guess with wanting people to like your game, know your audience. Who is your audience?
Yeah.
Who are you going for? One of my friends who is in video game development, Roblox. The audience of Roblox is very young. He has a Discord server. It's an absolute shit show because the audience is very young. So there's also places you can look to like host your video game, like itch.io is one place I know people go to. GitHub, you can host games on GitHub and you can try and share them around. I'm sure there's there's a Discord server for everything. You can go to Discord servers for like there's probably video game development Discord servers. You can get feedback from stuff there. There's probably forums that you can go to. A big part of it too is like getting feedback. You want if you want people to like your game, you want to find people to tell you if they like your game or not, like your game
Mhm.
or not. Blech. So, Fisher has also linked another channel that talks about creating games. So yeah, I think we'll leave it there because there's a lot more we
Yeah.
could talk about and dive
It's a
into
very
this
big
topic on.
question,
But I hope that covers your question. Whoever asked that.
or at least shows you a place to start.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, we've been going for just over 2 hours now, and that was the last question on the spreadsheet. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Gaming
Sounds
the Good
good.
Life says, yeah, thanks. That was me who asked. Yeah, I saw you say earlier something like, thanks for going so in depth on a complex, difficult question. um, yeah. Any closing thoughts, Sog? Anything else you want to mention? Any other last minute questions anyone has?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just any last minute questions we didn't get to.
Hmm.
As for any final thoughts,
So,
we'll be doing this again on December
yes. What day would it be? December 2nd, I
something.
think? Yes, December 2nd is going to be the
Second.
next time we do this. Another month out.
Yep. Then after that, the chat after the next chat will be pretty involved, I think, 'cause that'll be after December and
Yeah.
your PTO and a
Yeah,
lot of
hopefully we
time
get a
will.
lot of stuff done in December.
Yeah.
Um, I want to get us a lot of stuff done this month to start the ball rolling.
Oh, me too.
Yeah,
But
I'm leaving here. I'm gonna grab a bite, and then I'm gonna probably review the timer pull request.
let's go.
So, and like I said, my target is less than 119 open pull requests by the end of the year, and we're at 151. So,
No, we'll go back out.
yep.
I
I
show
mean,
Gar says, "You guys are great. Thanks in Twitch chat. Thank you for listening, being
thank
part of
you,
it."
citizen.
Yes.
Java just says, just close out the pull request on October 31st and reopen them on January. Nah.
That's cheating.
Benny says, you can thank me for opening 3 pull requests in 3 days. While you're here, Benny, the Green Rock revision, the Green Rock reversion pull request is on my tab bar. I will get to that relatively soon, probably sometime this month. Derpy needs me. I do. I need you.
I'm about to jinx everything and say I'm proud of you guys for not editing the channel description once throughout this whole chat, but now that's going to change. So
Oh, what?
yeah, it's
Oh, is
monthly
it
dev
because
chat.
it's an event? Can they not?
Oh, can't they?
I think the event probably blocks it.
Oh.
Yo, we found it. We found it. So this is something we've talked about before. I don't want to keep going, but if there's no event in the channel, anyone can change the channel status for
Yeah.
voice channels. We've realized this. There was no way to stop it. There was no option. There was no permission to say who can change the channel description. So it was just madness. But now that we're doing events, it locks the channel description. Let's go. All right, well.
All right.
Yep. Once again, thank you for everyone for coming.
Yep.
We'll be doing this once again next month, December 2nd. Lots of big things planned for this month and next month. The next update will be late January. I believe the current date is the 27th. So when we have the February chat, we'll be able to talk about that. But yeah, lots of stuff in store. So.
Yep.
Sure says, so are we going to publicly reveal that the Avi are getting merged tomorrow? No, that'll be next up. That'll be next dev chat. Okay. So it's told your horses. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. Yeah.
I think he spelled closed wrong too, but good wrong.
Yeah. But see you all next time.
See ya.